single word, wait, exploded through the quiet hush of the chapel. All at once, the gentle glow from the stained glass windows seemed to dim as every guest turned toward Ethan Matthews. 8 years old, knuckles white around his tiny ring pillow, he stood trembling at the front aisle. His voice cracked as he cried, "Stop the wedding!" A wave of shock rippled through the pews. Emily's face drained of colour, her carefully composed mask slipping for the first time. And in that heartbeat, everyone knew something terrible had just begun. The hush that followed stood heavier than the marble pillars around them. David Matthews, his groom's tuxedo impeccable and eyes fixed on Emily, looked down at his son with confusion etched into his brow. Emily reached out for David's hand, her voice shaking. "You know me! I would never! This is absurd! Ethan's just a child!" He doesn't understand. Yet David's heart pounded with a father's alarm. He knelt beside Ethan, his voice low but firm. "Buddy, these are very serious things. Are you absolutely sure about what you heard?" Ethan's tears sparkled in the candlelight as he nodded fiercely. "I'm sure, Dad. She's been mean to me when you're not around, and she's planning to hurt you." A storm of disbelief and hurt crossed David's face as he turned back to Emily. "Is there any truth at all to what Ethan says?" he asked, voice quivering. Emily's eyes darted to the guests, the hum of whispered speculation growing behind her. For a trapped moment, she looked like a wounded animal. Then she snapped, her voice sharp as a broken glass shard. "Ridiculous! You're going to believe the wild imaginations of an 8-year-old over me, your fiancé?" The words hung in the air like a foul stench. She recoiled briefly, then, as if remembering herself, forced a bitter laugh and accused Ethan of throwing a tantrum. But David saw the flicker of something darker in her glare, cold calculation replacing false sweetness, and his heart sank. "Ethan," David said, brushing a tear from his son's cheek, "tell me everything from the start." All eyes locked on the small figure before them, as Ethan, voice shaking but determined, wove a tapestry of hidden cruelty. He spoke of Emily's icy stares when David was away, the cruel words she whispered under her breath, and the bruising grip she once used to yank him away from a spilled glass of juice. He spoke of the night he heard her speaking urgently to a man named Mark, of insurance policies for millions of dollars, of whispered plans for a tragic accident. Finally, he described the secret files he'd uncovered on Emily's laptop, a life insurance policy doubling the payout if David died, and a folder of photos showing Emily with a scarred, dark-haired stranger, Mark. Ethan was certain. With each revelation, the congregation's gasps grew louder, and Emily's facade shattered completely. The radiant bride, who had glided down the aisle only moments before, now looked ashen. Her lips trembled, no words left to defend herself. David's face went pale, betrayed love twisting into heartache. "I think this wedding is over," he whispered, voice heavy as he stood. Pandemonium erupted. Guests leapt from their seats, some to follow Emily's fleeing figure into the sunlit courtyard, others to gather at the altar in stunned clusters. David's trembling hand reached for his phone. 911, my fiancée just ran from our wedding. She's plotting to kill me for insurance money, he told the dispatcher, each word a ragged breath. Behind him, Ethan clung to his father's leg, relief and fear roiling in his chest. Soon, police officers flooded in. One remained with David and Ethan. The other dashed after Mark, who burst back into the church looking hunted. "That's him," Ethan whispered, pointing. Within seconds, the scarred man bolted again, but officers swiftly captured him just outside. Dragged to the local station, David and Ethan sat in a quiet room, recounting every detail for Officer Johnson. As they spoke, the conspiracy's layers peeled away. Emily was not her real name, but Sarah Connor, a career con artist who'd seduced David, pushed for higher life insurance, and planned an accidental death on their honeymoon, skydiving. Sharks, even rock climbing, to collect a multi-million-dollar payout. Mark, her partner in crime and in life, had provided the network of aliases and fake documents. Officer Johnson offered consolation. "You're not to blame. These people are professionals, but because of Ethan's courage, they failed." In the weeks that followed, legal hearings, media inquiries, and tear-stained meetings with lawyers became their new routine. David installed cameras and alarms. Ethan retreated at first into silence, haunted by the thought that Sarah might return. Then Jack, David's best man, arranged a camping trip, Tents pitched beneath whispered pines. Laughter rose around crackling campfires. Ethan learned to bait hooks with worms and roast marshmallows until they glowed. That night, wrapped in the hush of the forest, David pulled his son close and whispered, "Thank you for saving me." Ethan, cheeks sticky with campfire smoke, pressed in. We saved each other. Just as healing began, another blow fell. One crisp autumn afternoon, 6 months after the ill-fated wedding, Officer Johnson appeared at their door. David braced for more bad news. Instead, his voice was soft, grave. Emily, Sarah, had been found dead in a motel room near Las Vegas, an apparent suicide. David staggered back, the world tilting. Ethan's small hand found his father's. "Are you okay, Dad?" The question echoed in the quiet living room. David drew in a breath, voice trembling. I don't know." They grieved together, attending counselling sessions where father and son learned to name their fear and anger. Slowly, life regained its familiar rhythm. Ethan dove into detective novels, his curiosity now a spark of hope rather than dread. David returned to work, tentatively exploring new friendships. On the 1-year anniversary of the wedding day, they drove to a crystal blue lake, picnic basket in hand. As the sun melted into fiery hues, David ruffled Ethan's hair. "You know what I've learned?" he asked. Ethan shook his head, eyes wide. "The most important relationship in my life is right here." He tapped his chest over his heart. "You and me." Ethan beamed, throwing his arms around his father. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, kiddo," David whispered, the weight of the past year lifting at last. They gazed at the sunset, 2 silhouettes against a sky painted in hope. The darkness would come again, someday. But they knew one truth that time could never erase. Together, they could face anything. If Ethan's story of bravery and love moved you, subscribe for more tales that warm the heart. And tell us in the comments, if you were in Ethan's shoes, what would you have done? The sun had barely crept over the horizon the morning after their lakeside picnic when David found himself awake before Ethan. He wrapped a blanket around his shoulders and stepped onto the porch, cup of steaming coffee warming his hands. The air smelled of wet pine needles and fresh dew, and somewhere nearby a lone bird began its dawn song. As he watched the mist rise from the water, David let himself remember the fear and shame of the past year, and then pushed it away. Today was about new beginnings. In the distance, he saw Ethan stumbling barefoot down the steps, hair mussed from sleep. Rubbing his eyes, his son joined him on the porch, holding a mug of hot chocolate. David offered him a smile as warm as the sun rising behind them. They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their drinks, while the world slowly came to life around them. A soft breeze rustled the wild grass, and David noticed how Ethan's shoulders no longer carried the same tension. The boy's face, though still young, had a serenity now, an ease that speaks of wounds beginning to heal. David took a deep breath and asked, "What are you thinking about?" Ethan glanced over, chocolate mustache on his lip, and shrugged. "I was just thinking how good this is," he said. "Just us, and a new day." His words were simple, but they carried a gravity David could feel in his chest. It was in that moment he understood. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant embracing every sunrise together, even the ones that followed the darkest nights. In the week that followed, David and Ethan settled into a new routine, marked by small, joyful rituals. Every morning, they walked to the corner bakery for cinnamon rolls, flaky, sticky, and warm in their hands. On Tuesdays, they volunteered at the local community garden, digging in the rich earth and planting sunflowers that would tower over their heads by midsummer. On Friday evenings, they held story nights, where Ethan read aloud from his detective novels and David pretended to be Inspector Johnson, complete with a makeshift magnifying glass fashioned from a paper towel roll. Laughter filled their living room, peeling away the last echoes of fear. Yet each night, as David tucked Ethan into bed, he still whispered a promise. "No matter what comes, I'm always listening." Word of Ethan's courage continued to ripple outward. At school, teachers praised him for bravery in standing up to injustice. He received a certificate and a quiet, proud applause in the assembly hall. Neighbours stopped by with homemade cookies and sympathetic smiles, grateful that such evil had been stopped. A local reporter wrote a feature about the boy who saved his father, And though David was hesitant at first, he agreed to a short interview, hoping that sharing their story might inspire others to trust their instincts and speak their truths. Late that night, as he read aloud the printed article, he caught Ethan's eyes shining with pride. The boy whispered, "We did good, didn't we?" And David felt his heart swell, knowing that the greatest victory wasn't the conspiracy thwarted or the criminals caught. It was the bond they'd forged in the fire of adversity. Months turned into a year, and the world kept turning. Ethan grew taller, stronger, blossoming into a confident boy who knew his voice mattered. David, too, found peace in the knowledge that genuine happiness didn't come from fairy tale weddings or perfect partners, but from honest connections and shared mornings. Together, they had rewritten their story. One not of betrayal and danger, but of hope and healing. And as they stood one evening on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the dusk, David reached for Ethan's hand. "You ready to face whatever comes next?" he asked. Ethan squeezed his fingers and grinned, the golden light of the setting sun framing his face. "Always," he replied, and in that single word lay the promise of every tomorrow they would greet side by side.